Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
All right, we are back. And today, Jesse, we are talking about a little thing called momentum. Momentum, and I got a story about momentum. But first, speaking of momentum, I want to invite everybody, hey, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's been helpful for you and meaningful for you, will you do me a favor and share this episode with a colleague or two? And or leave us a review on your platform of choice. This is the way that we get the word out about the podcast and continue to help more and more pastors, which is what we are really passionate about. We need some momentum in that area, Jesse. So
I need some momentum, Jason.
That's right. So talking about momentum, my favorite story about momentum was as a Lakers fan back in the Kobe Shaq days, when we had an embarrassment of riches, talent-wise, but we were losing. Basically, we were up 3-0 in the Western Conference Finals against the Portland Trail Blazers. I don't know if this is a sore spot for you, Jesse, but you have no love for Portland, right? I mean, that's not your.
In fact, I have the opposite of love.
Okay, so yeah, so
Trailblazers. So
I'm just making sure I got the rivalry.
Seattle Supersonics guy. I have some hate for the Oklahoma people that stole our team and for Howard Schultz who stole them, but that's a whole nother podcast for another time.
And that Thunder team was awesome. Anyway, sorry to rub that in, but. So the Lakers, they were up 3-0. The Trailblazers come back and they tie it 3-3. And you just sort of felt like this thing was over. But Lakers had home court advantage, and it wasn't going well in that game 7. They were losing. And now Kobe wasn't a superstar yet, but they were losing. They were down 15 points going into the fourth quarter. People were leaving. I think Jack Nicholson probably peaced out by then. I don't remember. I just remember watching this game like, I can't believe we're going to lose game 7. And then Derek Fisher hits a 3. And then Shaq starts dunking on guys. And all of a sudden, they're chipping away at this lead. And about halfway through the fourth, you sort of got a little bit of a feeling like, hey, if they can put together a little run here, maybe this game isn't over. Mm-hmm. And they went on this incredible scoring run, one after another. And each time the Lakers scored, the crowd got louder and louder. It's like as they were witnessing in real time, something changed. I don't know what changed, but the momentum in this game was so big that when they tied it, and I remember this play, I think it was, and somebody needs to double check this on video. I'll go double check myself, but I believe it was a Kobe to Shaq alley-oop that tied the game with like 3 minutes left. And everybody in that stadium knew what I knew watching the game. The Lakers are going to win.
Yeah. There's
no way they lose this game. There was something about the momentum that you knew there was no way it was going to go any other way. Sure enough, they win Game 7, and they went on to win the championship that year. Momentum is a mysterious thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of folks, when they have it, they don't know why. And when they lose it, they don't know why. I think it would be interesting, and what to talk about over the next few weeks is, what is church momentum? What is ministry momentum? What does it look like? Can you get momentum going, and how do you do that? And what are the different ways that it shows up in the life of the church? Because a lot of churches are really hungry for, Jesse, and this is what people talk to, is like, well, how do I get things rolling? Mm-hmm. How do I get things rolling? How about you? When you've experienced momentum in the life of your church, what are some signs that you have it? Like that feeling like, we're not going to lose. We're going to keep going forward.
I think there's, for me, maybe the one of the main indicators is when I'm hearing people sticking around and continuing to have conversations after a meeting or after a worship service or an event. I go, something's in the air right now that is an indication that we have some forward momentum. And the opposite when something's over and everybody just immediately shuts their notebooks and leaves the meeting, or, this worship service ends and everybody heads for the doors. When it's not there. So how did we get there? Well, there's a lot that we're going to talk about related to that. But one of the things I notice is there's something in the air that people, kind of like that crowd, they start to feel good. They start to stick around. They start to lean in. And it sort of has this catalytic effect that picks up even more momentum. And it's one of those things that when you have it, you're just kind of looking around grateful for it and going, how do you reproduce this? Is there a method or a strategy that maybe more than anything, it's not forcing it, but creating the environment where momentum becomes possible? And that's, I think, the thing. Derek Fisher could have missed that three.
Yeah.
He did. He hit the shot, and that got the ball rolling. And then there was consistency that built on top of that.
Yeah, I think momentum is, we've talked about the flywheel in the past. Momentum is a flywheel that takes a lot of energy to get going. But once it does, it moves with incredible, and it feels almost unstoppable force. Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to make a note. I don't know if I've made up my mind on this, but I think in church world, in spiritual world, we would use the word revival, perhaps, to talk about momentum that's happening in the church. Maybe that's too strong of a word. Maybe that's not necessarily the same thing, but I think they're related.
Yeah.
That it's consistency and enthusiasm for the work of God over time.
Yeah. There's sort of a vitality that comes with that consistency and enthusiasm over time that looks like momentum. It's things are going well. I couldn't even put my finger on one specific thing, but we're doing it, and man, it's leaving this positive forward moving direction to it, or something like that.
Yeah. And what I found is, and this may be surprising to some of the pastors listening, is what I found is sometimes it doesn't mean momentum isn't just the result of like we did some big ministry, massive initiative or program. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Oftentimes, momentum happens from just being excited about a small thing. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it almost doesn't matter what thing. As long as your folks rally around it and get excited about it, it can generate incredible momentum in the life of the church. There was a mantra or a philosophy that Robert Schuller had that has always stuck with me. Robert Schuller, he was the one that, I think it was Garden Grove Church. It was a Reformed church in America that started in a drive-in movie theater in 1955. Robert Schuller is the one who turned that eventually into the first real mega church I ever heard of, and that was Crystal Cathedral in Garden Grove. And he used to have this saying, find a need and meet it, find a hurt and heal it, find a problem and solve it.
Yeah.
For him, I mean, he never phrased it this way, but I think it would be safe to say for him, generating momentum when you're trying to grow a church was all about the people. It always was, it always is, always will be, that you can't have momentum without people. It's about what's going on with the people that's generating momentum. I think that's important to say because some people think they can program their way into momentum when really you have to people your way into momentum. It's all about the relationships that you have. For us at Tower Hill, we've had some great seasons of momentum. And I know we're experiencing it because there's some kind of telltale signs, sort of like you were saying. One is ideas are bubbling up organically from the people. It's not just coming top down, it's coming bottom up. People have ideas. Hey, we want to do this group to do XYZ. And, some ideas are better than others, but it's the excitement that you want to capture. You really want to try not to say no when those things come up because you want folks to be excited. Hey, did you ever think about, we could have a carnival ministry, whatever. And he's okay. Yeah, man, let's pray about that. But ideas tend to be bubbling up more. There's certainly more engagement in the things that you're offering.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, not always, but usually there's more participation in worship, more participation in groups and Bible studies. And there's also more stories that we're hearing about people growing in their relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
They're just kind of happening organically. People are just talking. There's an excitement, there's a buzz about what's happening in the life of your ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it funny how the stories happen? It's like all of a sudden you start hearing stories of life change and transformation. And you know that that's not the work, that's not us, that's God doing his work in the people. But there's something about the sort of confluence of what we're doing and what God's doing and how it's all happening at the same time. I don't know. It's really hard to define it, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to grab hold of that. You said something with the idea phase that I think is an indication. I mean, there's some kind of hard they're not quantitative metrics, they're more like just a sense or a feeling about it. But you start to notice, like you're saying, the ideas coming to the surface, and you can also create an environment where ideas can flourish. And I think that's a crucial part of momentum too. Is, and I think about in our life, we have kind of an adopted a not Robert Schuller's deal, but ours is say yes unless there's a good reason to say no. And I think a lot of times in church leadership, we get into the saying no to ideas business because it sounds like a lot of work, or we're not sure we have the resources, or who's going to lead the charge, or whatever. And we just reversed that. We said, we're going to say yes unless there's a good reason. There are good reasons to say no to a carnival ministry that we can't sustain or do, probably, or whatever. But a lot of times we just get in the way of something that can be a catalyzer for momentum. And instead of letting people loose and pursuing ideas, we kind of play it safe and play it comfortable. And I would say safety and comfort get in the way of momentum.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, moving forward, ideas, innovation are indicators of momentum, but also generators of it as you try things, see what happens.
Yeah. So, okay, back to the people. Understanding that momentum is a direct result of what's going on with the people. I think it's about figuring out, I think you can strategically work towards momentum. You can't exactly manufacture it, but I think if you do these things well, momentum is often a byproduct. And that is understanding, what do the people need? What can we offer to help fill those needs? And then how do we close the gap between the two?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it that people need or are looking for? What are they hungry for? And I know everyone says, well, they're hungry for God. Yes, of course. But in what way is that showing up in their lives? Is it that they need a Christianity 101 class? Is it that they need a serving opportunity? Do they need something for their whole family, something for their children? What are their needs? And then can we meet those needs through what we're able to offer? And that takes some honesty. And if you can't, well, are there ways that we can sort of close that gap and start need meeting, right? Find a need and meet it, find a hurt and heal it, find a problem and solve it.
Yeah.
And for us, what this looked like was some very common things that I call the four-legged stool of momentum. And I think if you pay attention to these four things, you do a good job of need meeting in the life of the church, and you set yourself up, I think, for some momentum. So here are the four legs, and then we'll go through each one. The first is, what is your outreach engine? Your outreach engine. How are people hearing about your church and connecting with your church? What are some of the conversations people are having about the church? In what ways is the church getting into the community? That's the first one, the outreach leg. So the next leg is about your Sunday morning worship and making sure that you're doing it in such a way that you are meeting the needs of those who are coming to your worship service. Now, I know that some people will hear that and they'll get super offended and they'll, you know, all the Calvinists, no, I'm just kidding, all the Reformed theologians, rightfully so, would say it's not about meeting the needs, it's about worshiping the Lord. Mm-hmm. Yes, I don't disagree with that. But why does it have to be one or the other? I think worship, I mean, Jesus tells us in the Great Commandment that both the vertical and the horizontal axis of our faith are inseparable. And I think it's the same thing in worship. How are we honoring and worshiping the Lord while at the same time paying attention to the needs and the hurts and the pain points and the desires of the people? I think that's all connected. So all of that to say, is the way we do worship engaging and connecting and meeting the needs of the people? I think if you do that well, you can engage both people far away from God and close to God. You can engage guests and you can engage leaders. You can engage them all. And I think that matters. I really do. I think that is a leg that helps create momentum. Okay, then the third leg is what we call our next gen ministry or youth ministry, kids ministry. And even if you just focused on offering something that was really good on Sunday mornings, that's enough. But that's when kids are excited to jump in. They're not dragging their feet to not want to go in. And then fourth is some sort of small group culture, Bible study, small group, whatever it looks like in your church. It's where relationships are cultivated and where, if you do it right, people are doing pastoral care for one another. People are cared for. So those are the four legs. Let's jump in a little bit more into each one. The first one, what is your outreach engine? So this can look like a lot of things. It can look like a social media strategy, certainly, to get the word out about the life of the church. And in your social media strategy, make sure that you are following the 80-20 rule. That's something we work hard at. And that is talk about others 80% of the time, talk about yourself 20% of the time. Mm-hmm. In other words, if all your social media posts are come to our potluck, come to worship, come to this, come to that, people will start tuning you out. Yeah. And it feels like you kind of don't care about anything but just the calendar of your events. Yeah. Really, the most effective strategy is if you spend, even if you spent 50% of your time, to be honest, saying, hey, we are so excited. Kids are back to school. Have a great back to school, everybody. We know school started today. May God bless you as you start your new grade. Teachers, hang in there. You're going to be tired by third period. It's okay. Some sort of encouraging thing for people outside your church, just for your community. Hey, we're so excited. The farmers market's going to be happening this Saturday, right? It's showing that you care about what everybody else cares about. And that's a way of helping people to see as, oh man, this church really, that's really cool that they did that. That's really that they care about that. So part of it's social media strategy, certainly. How do you guys think about social media strategy? Is it similar?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably, if we're really honest and looked at our posts, it'd be more of a third, and a third. I would say something like that, where a third is trying to be outward oriented or other minded. Like, let's pray for our school staff and students as they're heading back to school. We'll have a post like that right now. Probably a third is advertising, probably a little more than we would like, but it's, hey, come to this event. Don't forget about this. Remember, we're gonna, our fall kickoff Sunday, etc. And then a third is other content, like this scripture or a memory verse or a word of encouragement or something like that. It's different kind of content. It's not advertising and it's not necessarily celebrating something in our community. It's just being present in that space. So I would say we're probably a third. Our staff probably could tell us more about how that actually looks. But that's our thinking, is we want to be engaged with our community. It's not always realistic to know which team is going to the state playoffs and celebrating them and tracking the news. So it's hard, but we do our best to have some of that content on there. So maybe you start 2080 just to get your foot in the door and moving in that direction.
Yeah, that's good. So social media is one way to develop your sort of outreach engine. The other thing is, are you having opportunities for outsiders to come in?
Yeah.
Well, there's really two different ways to do outreach, right? So it's insiders going out and inviting outsiders in. Yep. So in that first category, we just had our annual fireman's fair where we volunteer in all the booths. And this year I was doing the see how fast you could pitch one. Guaranteed winner every time. For
Nice, Jason.
$5, you throw the ball 3 times. It's like, and see how and there's like this radar gun or whatever, and it's kind of fun, and kids love doing it and showing off and all that. But we go out, we wear our Tower Hill shirts, and they're a little different every year. This year said "I love my church" on one side, and it had Tower Hill on the back.
Mm.
And they announce us on the loudspeakers. Thank you to all the volunteers from Tower Hill Church, and it creates a lot of conversations with people in the community. And that's part of our strategy. So that's one event that we do. Another event is our Christmas event that we talk about every year, our Christmas on the Hill, where it's intentionally designed for non-church people. We try to get them in and to talk about them and invite them to our family Christmas Eve service. And then we try to do things when we challenge and encourage our congregation to do some inviting. That's our outreach engine. How about you? Do you have other specific things that you do to sort of
I think
drive that
thinking
engine?
in terms of on-ramps into the community. I mean, so the social media presence out there, and then, we, similar to you all, we have some service things that we do in a more public-facing kind of way, not in a self-serving way, but in a, hey, we care about our community, and I think people do notice that. We always, often, we're asking the question, if Marine View was just gone one day, would our neighbors notice?
Yeah,
And I think the answer that we keep coming to, and I'm glad about, is yes, there would be some big things missing. And that's a good thing. So, but a couple of things that we do to kind of flip it around to begin to move people toward the church without inviting them necessarily to a worship service. We have our jazz concerts that we do, monthly jazz concert at the church, secular music, secular artists that are invited in, the best that we can find in our region, and sometimes from New York or other places. And we just make it a free concert. It's donation basis. Anybody can come. We have a good time. But it's just a way to say we're here for our community, and you all love music, and so do we, so let's enjoy this together. We stole from you guys a couple years ago and started our Campfire and Carols night, where we kind of light the nativity and kind of do a bunch of stuff Christmassy that's oriented towards our community. And so it's those kinds of things that our church as a family can feel really good about giving to the community, but also benefit from and enjoy too. And so I think that's kind of to your point of outreach that includes the church and exposes people to the relationships, and they go, I wonder what those people are like. Why are they out here? What are they doing? So that relational part that's so crucial is facilitated by those sorts of things.
Yeah. And then the next logical step or leg of the stool is, okay, then what are you inviting them to?
Yep.
And your Sunday morning experience is the number one thing. If people are going to show up to your church, chances are it's going to be on a Sunday morning. That's the big open door, either online or in person.
Before they get to the door, they're going to come to your website. So just know that. And we say this so often, Jason, but please just take a little bit of time to have fresh eyes on your website and go, if somebody pulled this up, we don't need to be perfect. We're not, some crazy big organization, but is it credible enough for people to go, you know what, we should go there, or we could try that out? Or, is your online, whatever version of worship you're offering there, is it credible to the point where they would say, you know what, we should go check out Jason in person or something like that. So anyway, my 2 cents on the website.
No, I'm glad you mentioned it, because 2 or 3 years ago now, we did a big redo of the website because we noticed it just needed some help. It didn't do what we wanted it to do. And already it's out of date. So we're doing a big redo again. And we got a photographer coming on Sunday. He's going to take a bunch of pictures of folks because we want more pictures on the website and all of that. So you always have to keep an eye on that, because that's actually the glue between your outreach engine and your Sunday morning experience.
True. Very true. And you said something you were talking about in terms of relationship. And so capturing what we would call assets or photos of your community in action are going to give people something of a preview of the kinds of people and the kind of community that they're considering coming to be a part of. So really important. And it's so hard to keep up, Jason, but it's worth it. And every time we go through that process, as hard as it can be, if you don't keep up with it, we see a carry on effect and it has an immediate impact. So it's
Yeah.
worth it.
So coming to worship now, again, we'll link to some recent episodes we did. I think that first impressions episode's a real good one to come back to from Greg Atkinson about when people are coming in, you're really just thinking about how are we meeting their needs,
Yep.
how are we anticipating their needs, how are we doing a good job of connecting them and make them feel at home so that in that first 7 minutes of critical time, they feel like, boy, this place, they're expecting me. They're not suffocating me. and their worship experience is something that draws me in.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we just talked about this last week about creating moments that lead to movement. How are we creating moments that help people take a step towards Jesus? All the things you just want to make sure is good. And I'll just give you an example. There was a time early on when sometimes we would have folks in the worship band or singers who probably shouldn't have been in the worship band that we didn't want to say no to. And what happens is people get distracted.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually, you know what I heard more than once was I felt so nervous for them
Yeah.
the whole time.
Becomes a place of focus that ought not be a place of focus.
Right, which means, and so it's like, because we have this tension. We include as many people as we possibly can, but not everybody's going to be able to do it because the quality matters. And I don't care if it's traditional, contemporary, jazz, whatever your worship service is, the quality of the music drives so much of it. So you just want to make sure that it's as good as it can be while including as many as you can. But there's a line there. And sometimes
there
just like,
hey,
it's not your gift to be up front leading worship. It's okay.
And I think it's okay. We did some recruiting for our worship team this last Sunday, and our worship leader, he was up there and he was recruiting. He's trying to kind of say, hey, we'd love to have a conversation with you. And then, we'll have something of an audition process. And I said, what Larry's trying to say to you is that we would love for you to be a part of the team, but this isn't for everybody either. And, we want to include lots of you. And if you have some gifts for this, but there's also a standard that we're going to employ here. So just know that going in. And so I think saying that out loud, it kind of filters through. You're going to get some American Idol types that have low self-awareness about how their voice actually sounds or something. But, you got to be willing to have those conversations. And by having something of a vetting process that you go through, you can have some of that ahead of time and not have to, fire them after they start or something, which is, I would say the other piece related to that, and maybe you're going to touch on this, is if you're using technology in your services, screens, videos, other kinds of things, there really should be a seamless part and not stand out in a bad way or capture too much attention. And you want it to be just blend into the service itself, as if it's just part of the water that you're swimming in. And so just be attentive to how is your technology functioning. And if your music or your volume is too loud or too quiet, that's an issue. If you have a bunch of misspellings in your slides, if you're typing your sermon scripture in or your slide content and you're keep making errors, well, one or two people can kind of ignore. But if it's every week, week after week, there's words missing and different, it just starts to become a point of focus. So anyway, we kind of overbaked that. But just thinking in terms of what is the level of quality that we're capable of. We're not a Taylor Swift concert. That's not where we're trying to be. But how do we communicate credibility with the resources and the folks that we do have?
Yeah. And I always get defensive when I talk about excellence in worship. I get defensive because I feel the criticism when I talk about it, as if to say that striving for excellence in worship is somehow unspiritual or unpure as you're thinking about worshiping God. And that just hasn't been the case in my experience. In my experience, it's only dialed in the effectiveness of that hour that I'm really able to let go. I'm really able to think and ponder and pray. And when things are done in such a way that I'm led and not distracted, it actually has the opposite effect. That the planning and having it really dialed in helps me let go more. if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
And I
it
feel
creates an
like my worship
environment.
experience is
Yeah,
more
we're
powerful.
leaning in, we're experiencing God's presence, and it's not about creating a show. It's about creating an environment where God can meet people, and the Holy Spirit can be at work in their hearts and lives, and we don't do too many things to get in His way or something like that.
Yeah.
So planning ahead and being prepared and pursuing excellence in all things, I think, is just good stewardship. So why wouldn't
Yeah.
we want to do that?
Yeah. Okay. Then the third leg of the stool is making sure that understanding when people come to church, they're coming in a minivan, there's multiple generations. You want to make sure that there is something engaging for the kids on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of different philosophies on this, and there are some churches like we always do Sunday school separate from worship because we think that's important that kids are in worship and in Sunday school. And that's fine. You know, you do whatever you think works for your church. In our experience has been that our people, I don't know if it's just the Northeast, they won't give us 2 hours. They
Yeah.
give us one, and we do Sunday school at the same time. But here's what I noticed. So early on, when we were just launching contemporary worship, and our Sunday school at the time was very old school. I think, the curriculum was pretty good, and it was kind of as good as it could be at the time. But I remember hearing a story of a kid kicking and screaming basically because they didn't want to go to Sunday school. And it wasn't just like separation anxiety. It was like they hated it. and
Yeah.
and the reason is because they were bored. And I had a talk with my son. I told him it was going to be okay. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't him. But yeah. But
Nope.
I did hear, that it wasn't something that kids were really looking forward to. And there's a little bit of dragging of the feet in order to get there. And we knew from youth ministry days that oftentimes, at least in our generations now, that if the kids are excited, it brings the parents. It's actually the opposite. And we knew that we needed something that was going to be more engaging, but honestly more effective. How long have we all heard the story that, well, kids grow up in youth ministry, they grow up in Sunday school, and then they go off to college, and their faith is deconstructed, or they go away from the church and they never come back. And all the data from Barna and stuff suggests that's exactly what happens. But I think the reason it happens is because for them, we've boiled down faith to a series of kind of faith axioms combined with memory verses, and said, good luck. When what we haven't done is help them cultivate a real relationship with Jesus.
Mhm.
You can knock down a bunch of axioms, or, you can knock down a propositional faith, but it's really hard to knock down a strong relationship.
Yeah.
And so we decided that while we cared about content, we thought the relationship was more important. So we wanted to do it as much as we could to change that with our Sunday school. That's when we switched to the Orange curriculum.
Yeah.
And Orange, and there's other curriculums that do this too, but they focus on small group conversations around a topic or a scripture story rather than a lecture-based model. And it really changes things. I mean, the kids over time have grown so strong in their faith to the point where we have teenagers. We just had this last year. We had a teenager this summer. I think she's a rising senior. She said, there's no Bible study for seniors in the summer. I'm like, there's no Bible study for anybody, dude. Everyone's at the beach. And she goes, well, I want to lead one. We're like, yes.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to happen 10 years ago. It's just a different thing. And there's a lot of factors that go into that for sure. But ask yourself this: are the kids in your ministry, are they there just because they're in the holding tank while mom and dad are doing something else? Or are they really truly engaging and learning and having fun and excited to come back? So next gen is the third
Yeah,
leg of the stool.
so important. And you don't have to have all the bells and whistles of some crazy Disney environment to do that well. You're hitting on that relational piece. how do we get kids from into circles with a trusted adult that can share the love of Jesus with them and model that and walk with them through the ups and downs of being a kid, and have those kids know that we're not going anywhere. We're here for the long haul, and we want to impart that life with Jesus that lasts a lifetime. And so that kind of thinking, I think, is crucial, whether you just have a handful of kids or a whole bunch. We need to think in terms of turning everything upside down in order to love and serve our kids, the next generations. And I think that's reflected often in our budget, in our number of volunteers, how much of the church's resource goes to serve the next gen and to pass the baton of faith to the next generation. And if you're looking at that and going, well, we need to do better, well, then do better. Like, I think it's just one of those things where it's a must. And you will notice the carry-on effect is it's the rising tide lifts all boats. It will have a catalytic effect on the overall momentum of the community when you see young families, young kids connecting and telling the story of their faith, like your high school senior. How cool is that?
Yeah. And then the fourth leg of the stool is small groups, which we've talked a lot about. In fact, I'm going to do like a massive link tree at the bottom of these show notes. So if you go to reclaimleader.com/show notes, that's where you find them by episode. And I'll just put a bunch of links. We've talked about all four of the legs of this stool a lot. And so I'm just going to kind of pin a bunch of episodes if you want to dive in. You're like, hey, let's think more about small groups. Let's think more about next gen, so that folks, you can find it easily. But small groups, that's where the relationships are really happening. It's kind of like in church, this used to happen more organically than it does now. People would just get to know each other and they'd go out for breakfast. And now, just like with their kids, you got to do play dates. So you got to do play dates with adults. And that's what small groups essentially is. It's a play date as you are getting to know other people, families, couples, whatever that looks like in the life of the church. And that's where relationships are cultivated. And that's where pastoral care happens. So again, if your church is built on the model of the pastor does all the pastoral care, that's a really tough model, not only to sustain, but to really be effective. Unless you have a church of 12, that it gets to be too much for one person to handle. The best is when the people are doing the care. Now, I believe in that, but the people should be doing the care of the people. But that happens naturally. Somebody, you're in a small group and someone's mother is going into the hospital. What do? They all pray for them. They reach out. They do a potluck meal train. They do all the different things. They care for one another. Again, developing, even if you start with one small group, is better than none. And it's a way that you can start building that. But this fourth leg of the stool is such an important one, because this is where people are really becoming a congregation more than just a crowd that gathers on Sundays.
Yeah. And I think it actually, groups like that, small groups, when you get people into that kind of closer in community, it actually has some healthy preventative things as well. So say they're having a crisis of faith and you preach a sermon that they don't like. And if they weren't connected into a group, they might just be out the door and gone. But that group is going to say, hey, you notice you weren't in church last Sunday. Is everything okay? Like things that we can't notice. We can't notice everything about someone's personal spiritual life or well-being. And that caring means when those kinds of things come along, when something else gets knocked sideways in their life, there's a group to hold them in the community. That can be there with them. And so for us, we've noticed that a number of times when maybe somebody doesn't agree with the decision that we make as a church, but they're so connected into their group and to the community that they're going to stick it out, and they'll warm up to it over time. They always do. So, it's one of those things that it's just really crucial to have groups. And I think we talked about, I can't remember when the last time we dove into this, but we kind of have some layers of groups. We have our more small group, 8 to 14 size kinds of things. And then some community groups that are more in the, 25 to 35 range, where it's a little bit larger gathering. And there's some things that we like about that environment too, where you can be new and be anonymous and yet lean in as much as you want. So there's different ways to do groups, but the point you're making, and I think connected to momentum, is it has that cementing effect where that group is caring for each other, but they're now, this is my family. This is where I belong. This is where I fit. And you'll notice that has that pushing on the flywheel, keeping things going.
Yeah. So when Kobe alley-ooped to Shaq, that wasn't just something that happened spontaneously necessarily. It came from weeks, days, months, years of playing together and planning and developing so that they just could look each other a certain way and they knew that the play was coming. So momentum takes some strategic thinking, some planning. And again, it's a flywheel that takes a while to get going, but once it does, it's hard to stop. It's about enthusiasm. It's about meeting needs, healing hurts, solving problems in people's lives. And this is what we're going to get to next week is momentum is a product of excitement. Excited people invite others, and that creates more momentum. So I hope everyone has a great week. I hope that you, as you're thinking about momentum in your church, again, a great place to start is the four-legged stool of outreach, Sunday morning worship, next gen, and small groups. All right. Anything else before we sign off here? We've gone a little long today, but I think we had a lot to say.
We have a lot to say, Jason, is what it comes down to. But we really appreciate this conversation about momentum, and that's what we're rooting for. Momentum for the sake of God's kingdom, his purpose in people's lives, not momentum for momentum's sake or any of that kind of stuff, but to see real things happen in real people's lives. And that's our desire and longing. So hopefully this helps you. And Jason, appreciate you putting these thoughts together for our conversation on momentum.
You got it. And I do it because ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together. Take care, everyone.